Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's post-film discussion of the film Vishniac with Laura Bialis, the producer and director of the film, alongside our CWB scholar, Avi Ben-Hur. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, I am Ellen Resnick, the Educational Programs and Outreach Manager at Classrooms Without Borders. Classrooms Without Borders stands as a beacon of experiential learning dedicated to enriching minds and hearts through education. As we celebrate 13 years of groundbreaking programming, our commitment to fostering inclusivity and social justice remains steadfast. Together, we've hosted an impressive array of programs in the past 3 years alone, welcoming almost 80,000 participants from 58 countries and 46 states. While those numbers may impress, it is the narratives, connections formed, and profound transformations experienced that undeniably define our impact. To date, in 2024, we have 38 captivating events planned with over 2,500 registrants, with many more in the planning stages. If you would like to make a donation to support our mission, I will drop the donation link in the chat for you in just a few moments. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's guests. First, Laura Bialis, the award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work has delved deep into the Jewish experience, both across nations and within the borders of Israel. Her films, including Rock in the Red Zone and Vishniac, have captivated audiences worldwide with their personal perspectives on historical events and societal struggles. Laura's latest endeavor, the film that you viewed for today's event, Vishniac, takes us on a journey through the lens of a young Russian-born photojournalist documenting Eastern Europe shtetls, Weimar era Berlin, and the rise of Nazi power. We are honored to have Laura here with us today. Joining Laura is Avi Ben-Hur, our CWB scholar in residence, whose expertise in education, guiding, geopolitics, and Holocaust studies adds invaluable depth to our discussion. Avi's background includes directing the Archaeological Seminar School for Israel's tour guides to contributing to the curriculum of national guiding courses for the Israel Ministry of Tourism. Avi, thank you for being here with us today. Please send any questions you have this time in the chat directly to me, just in case Avi loses any connectivity. We'll be sure to have those. We will do our best to answer all of those as we dive into today's discussion with our two guests. And with that, Avi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ellen. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Laura, for joining us. So as usual, I will do a bit of a zoom out just to contextualize some of what you saw and heard in this excellent film. And I want to start with just the idea of recording Jewish life pre-Holocaust in Europe. Because I think that in many cases, the focus is always on the Holocaust itself and what was lost. And I think there's not enough of a focus, again, on what was lost. And the truth is that we have a lot of imagery. Vishniac gives us, as a superb photographer, gives us something special. I don't know if you're aware of this, but a kind of almost like a Hollywood film was made in the 1930s about 6 great cities. They lost one of the 6, but 5 out of the 6 cities, and there was Jewish life in these cities, was done on a very, very high level. And we have that film. And so we do have images of Jewish life in different parts of Europe before the war. And of course, as I said in the film, photography was invented in the 1830s. So, and we often forget that we have a lot of Civil War photography in the United States. So, it's not, photography was very, very developed before World War II. There's even color photography. It's very expensive. Okay, it wasn't used very much, but you already had the invention of color photography before World War II. And of course, films were also something that was were done at a very high level also before the war. So I think it's important for us to keep that in mind. And of course, there are questions about recording the Holocaust itself. And we know how much the Nazis tried to wipe out the evidence at the end of the war. And we know about Jewish photographers who took photographs in ghettos, in camps, and so on and so forth. Some of them were killed. Some of them who were killed succeeded in hiding their photographs ahead of time. Some survived. So we do have some imagery of the Holocaust itself. One of the issues that is dealt with very, very briefly in the film is the fact that Vishniac also takes photos of young German Jews who are working in kind of farming camps. And it's kind of interesting because this is a phenomenon that took place throughout Europe. They were called hachsharot, which basically was training. It was hachshara is training. Basically, these are Zionist training camps that were trying to take urban youth, Zionist urban youth, and prepare them for agricultural life in British Mandate Palestine, in the land of Israel. And clearly, these are we're talking about socialist Zionists, labor Zionists, who were running these camps. And again, it's not a German Jewish phenomenon. It's actually the transatlantic phenomenon. It was all over. So trans-European phenomenon. It was done all over Europe. In many cases, the youth who were trained there were murdered. They didn't make it out. What's interesting is Zionism was not a very strong force among German Jewry in terms of political choice for German Jews. Zionism is going to rise during the 1930s, but before the 1930s, the Zionist movement is not a very strong one in Germany, as it was not very strong in Western Europe at large, or even North America. It was much, much stronger in Central and Eastern Europe, and less strong where Jews were being thought they were being integrated into non-Jewish society. Again, if it's North America or in Western Europe, I'm talking about before the 1930s. There will be a strengthening of the Zionist movement in under the Nazi regime. I mean, Jews will look for alternative routes when they understood that integrating was no longer possible. But it's kind of interesting that those photos were also taken. You also notice that in the film they talked about how the German Jews, having been forced out of overall German society, were kind of hunkering down amongst themselves. And one of the interesting, not odd, but interesting facts was that by the end of the 1930s, German Jewry reached the peak of its creativity, because you had some of the best artists, musicians, filmmakers, academics, scientists in the world were basically kicked out of their professions, and they were still in Germany. And so you started having a flourishing of Jewish theater, of Jewish filmmaking, because people kind of like were forced to hunker down amongst themselves. So on the eve of their demise, actually, German Jewry's creativity peaked. What's interesting is the story, which is not the center of the film, but it's something that I think resonates for those of you who've heard of Vishniac before. I think, and myself included, for most of us, I think Vishniac is remembered because the Vanished World, okay, the book that came out in 1983, which made him quite famous, and that's much what I knew about him before the film. But what's interesting is that he is actually sent on a mission by the JDC, by the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, to document Jewish life in Central and Eastern Europe. This is 1935. And I think this raises a very interesting question mark. So 1935 is 4 years before 1939. Okay, we're not talking about documenting what's happening in Nazi Germany. We're talking about documenting Jewish life in Central and Eastern Europe, which in 1935 is not under any kind of Nazi occupation. It's not under a Nazi conquest. So I think that we can raise a question here. Why is there something about the timing? Why 1935? What's going on over here? And so something is going on. And it's going on in Poland, to be very, very precise. What's going on in 1935 in Poland? The kind of military dictator of Poland, who emerged in the 1920s, Marshal Pilsudski, dies in 1935. Pilsudski was the head of a very nationalistic party, which was anti-Semitic, but he himself was not an anti-Semite. In fact, he protected the Jews. Polish Jews who survived, either left Poland in the 30s or survived the Holocaust, look back with fondness in the years when Pilsudski was running the country, because he protected the Jews. But in 1935, he dies after having run the country for many years. And his party, which is an anti-Semitic party, began, starting from 1935, to apply a lot of discriminatory laws, starting with economic discriminatory laws against Polish Jewry. And so what we have is that we have this phenomenon between 1935 and 1939 that Polish Jews were integrated. They were in universities and they were in the free professions, were beginning to lose their jobs and their positions. They were starting to put back quotas, anti-Jewish quotas in a lot of places of work and a lot of universities and so on and so forth. And the eve of the outbreak of World War II and the eve of the beginning of the Holocaust, Polish Jews understood they didn't really have a future left in Poland. Nobody perceived the Holocaust around the corner, but just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, something to the tune of about 180,000 Polish Jews emigrated to British Mandate Palestine in those years. Okay, between 1935 and 1939, 1935, 1940. Okay, which is quite incredible when you think about it. It's part of what's called the Fifth Aliyah, which usually talks about German Jews, but there were 60,000 German Jews that came to British Mandate Palestine at the time. We had a huge amount of Polish Jews coming in at the time because of the pressure they were feeling. So when Vishniac is going to Eastern Europe and going to Poland and going further east from there, he's going to a place where the Jews don't know they're facing 1 minute before the demise, but life is not good. Life is not good there. And the joint, again, the JDC also doesn't know the Holocaust around the corner, but they're sending there to document. And I think this is very, very interesting for us to keep that in mind. Finally, and I think this is, to me, it was fascinating, and it's mentioned very briefly in the film, is that Vishniac is kind of fascinated by the Ostjuden, by the Eastern Jews. That's a very old term that usually relates to the following two phenomena. You had Jews migrating from Eastern Europe, okay, basically from the Tsarist Empire. And I'm talking now 18th century, 19th centuries, okay, early 20th century, and they're moving west. And they settle down in Western Europe, and some of them come to North America as well. And when the next waves of Jews come from the East, the Jews who have been integrated, to the extent they could be integrated, if it's in Germany or in the UK or in France or in the US or in Canada, they look askance at the Ostjuden, these Eastern Jews, okay? And we know this very well in the United States, for example. You had, German Jews who emigrated to the United States in the 1850s, 1860s. Remember, Brandeis is a good example of that, okay, of that generation, okay? And when you started having waves of Jews fleeing from the Tsarist Empire, starting from 1881, okay, for 4 decades, come to the United States, for example, okay, they were looked down upon by the German Jews, who 5 minutes ago were from the East. They weren't in Germany for 500 years. They'd come from the East to the West. So I find this fascinating that you have Vishniac, who was born in Russia. Okay, he's an Eastern Jew to all intents and purposes, right? He got to adulthood, okay, in the Tsarist Empire. He comes from that place, but he was so assimilated, okay, and it became so westernized that he looked at, I don't mean disparagingly, but he kind of looked at the place where he came from to a certain extent, with a kind of interesting nostalgia, but kind of almost anthropologically. And it's kind of interesting where this phenomenon, which historically in Jewish history, again, very prominently in the United States, but not just in the United States. It happened in Germany and it happened in a lot of other Western countries. This phenomenon of the now the so-called Western Jews looking at the Eastern Jews, where they came from, actually, kind of askance. It's kind of interesting where it's folded into one person. Although he doesn't look in them, he doesn't disparage them. He actually not admires them, but he has some nostalgia for them. I think it's quite interesting. And I think this is a good time for us to bring Laura into the conversation. So Laura, please put your video on and unmute, and welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Really
Thanks
a pleasure.
for watching my film.
So I'm going to share, guys. I'm just going to share with you that Laura is kind of a hybrid like me, although I've been here a little bit longer. She's both American and Israeli, and she's actually transmitting from Tel Aviv, correct?
Yes.
Or close to Tel Aviv, right? And I'm transmitting from Jerusalem. So that's just FYI. So let's just start from the beginning, which is what attracted you to this this project, to Vishniac, to the story?
Well, So it, like many things in life, it's kind of serendipitous. But many years ago, actually discovered that it was around 1996. I was introduced to Mara Vishniac Cohn in Santa Barbara, which is where I was my hometown and where she spent the last like 40 years of her life. She was married to Walter Cohn, who was a very prestigious scientist who founded the physics department at UCSB, University of California in Santa Barbara. And a mutual friend of ours who is a wonderful person, Pam Tosher, who's an art, and she's an artist, and sort of has that way about her of just knowing things, kind of saw us we were at an event. It was actually an Elie Wiesel lecture. And we were milling around before the lecture, and she sort of brought me over and said, you two need to meet each other. And I had just graduated from college. I had actually studied post-war and wartime and post-war Eastern Europe. So I sort of already had a knowledge of topics around the Shoah and Eastern Europe and pre-war, wartime, post-war. So Mara and I are sitting there waiting for Elie Wiesel to come on stage. And she is telling me the story of her childhood, basically, and her family's escape from Europe at the 11th hour. And I was on the edge of my chair, and she's talking about, this is December of 1940. And she was talking about how as a child, she was put on planes, trains, boats. Anytime there was some incident happening, she and her brother were sent to a relative in Sweden, sent to Riga alone, either together or one went here. And I was just like, what? And I'm like thinking about a Hollywood movie in my mind, and then I'm on trains. And then she's telling about how they finally got visas and they were in Sweden, but their father was in France, and they had to go back through Nazi-occupied Germany. They had to go back through Berlin to get to the boat because they were actually Latvian citizens. So that means, and the Soviet Union had just taken over Latvia. So if they would have gone to the east, they would have just gotten swallowed up by the Soviet Union. They wouldn't have been able to leave. It was like a fascinating, I was on the edge of my chair, and I did not know who Roman Vishniac was, which is embarrassing. But I was a photographer. I was a student of history, of theater, and a photographer. I did my own black and white photography. I had my own darkroom. And I was had studied all about Cartier-Bresson and all of these modernist photographers that were Vishniac contemporaries. And I had never heard of Vishniac. So, but I was fascinated by Mara. I thought she was an incredible storyteller. And she invited me and my parents over to their home, which you see in the film. It's that mid-century modern, you're like in a throwback to like all these objects from Europe. And her father's photographs were on the wall, and A Vanished World was there. And I said to my dad, you have this book, it's in your study. And then she goes to this closet and opens this closet, and she's got all the negatives and prints in this closet. And they kind of like a box falls down, and it's like on the portfolio with all the Einstein prints, It was like amazing. And of course, then I understand who Vishniac is. And I think it was just sort of like it's a very small Jewish community in Santa Barbara, California. And I think in the back of my mind was always this idea that this is one day going to be something that I'm going to do. And I was all over the world. I lived in Israel. When I came back to Santa Barbara for a time, I picked the project up. I reconnected with Mara and tried to convince her that we should do a film. And at the beginning, she wasn't really interested in doing a film because, well, she was interested, but she wasn't really sure about it because of the complex relationship that she had with her father. And she was concerned that he, was complicated. Could you make a film about such a person? And I can, over many meetings convinced her that yes, you could, and it would be a more interesting film that way. So this is how it got started.
Nice. That's a great story in of itself. So let's you said you yourself were a photographer and you start to mention all kinds of modern photographers. So what kind of distinguished Vishniac from his contemporaries? Like what makes him special or different as a
Well,
photographer?
I wondered this a lot, and I actually have books of some of the other contemporary people working in Poland and in Eastern Europe at that time. And I spent many, many years making this film, and many years with the photographs. And I can say that I think what sets him apart, I mean, obviously he's a master of light and he's a master of composition, but I think what sets him apart is his personality and the way that he engages the subject. Because when you look at all these incredible faces, these people are engaging with someone. I mean, there is a relationship as a photographer. There's a relationship that happens between the photographer and the subject. And it depends on that relationship, what it looks, what the image, what kind of image comes out. And the fact that he's sort of able, I feel like Vishniac is able to capture in these photographs, he's able to capture a lot of joy. He's able to capture in some way almost like the essence of a person. It's almost like I don't know what it made me wonder, what was he doing that got this response? Because one, if you were to collect them, all those faces, there is a common thread, which is you feel a lot of times they're smiling at him, and there's a spark of the person that you see that ends up on the film. And I don't know how he did it, but it's magic for me. And it's very special, and it's very amazing to be able to sort of connect with these individuals that could have been one of our relatives. We don't know who they are from the past. I look at them and I'm like, oh, that could be my great, third cousin or something. So yeah, it was something very special that he had.
But it seems to come, I think, crystal clear from the film that he's a real character. He's saying, how does he get people to do it? And he's a real character. I mean, this guy, he's a performer. He's a performer. He's an actor. He's got a lot of charisma, evidently. And it's not just the chutzpah that he has, because that's one thing that his daughter talks about. But I think there's something, evidently, he had this kind of personality that drew people out, that opened them up. That's my sense from the story that you told and the story that his daughter told, that at least the way I could see it, from my perception. But I want to go back to the book, the famous book, the most famous book that most of us know, the Vanished World, right?
Right.
And I think that because once again the JDC sends him, he has his own agenda as well, but the JDC sends him with a specific kind of a mission, to kind of document and to show what dire straits the Jews are in and what kind of condition they're in, because they're trying to raise money and so on and so forth. What I want to ask you is, do you think that this vanished and lost world, when we use that terminology, when we talk about pre-Holocaust Jewry, pre-Holocaust Jewry is all over the map. Pre-Holocaust Jewry is also Leon Blum, who was the Prime Minister of France, okay, was a secular socialist, and pre-Holocaust Jewry is also, Vishniac was also a secular assimilated Jew, and I think what comes out of most of his photographs, not of his whole oeuvre, I'm talking about specifically to the Vanished World, okay, and the stuff that you generally see most of, let's say, in the U.S. Holocaust Museum in D.C., are really the shtetl, or even the Jews that he photographs in the big cities, which have a lot of secular assimilated Jews, like in Vilna and in Warsaw and in Lodz. You had a lot of Jews there who were not religious. Think about Isaac Bashevis Singer and people like that, and didn't have payas and weren't dressed, traditionally or ultra traditionally. Do you think that it, to a certain extent, I'm not accusing him. I'm asking a question now about photography and how we perceive now images of Jewish life pre-Holocaust Europe, right? does it kind of mark, or it gives us a bit of a skewed view, in the sense that it's oh, this was Jewry. They were all traditional. They were all Orthodox. They were all Hasidic. They were all this kind of
Okay,
thing.
so right.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm not criticizing him or you, because it's just you know, I think that's what most people, the image that we have, he did a lot more than that, obviously. Okay, but that's, I think, what made him well known. What do you think about it?
So, okay, so first of all, I want to go back a little bit, because you say he was sent in we talked about 1935. So the truth is that we actually do not know when he first started to photograph in Eastern Europe, because the dates on his prints are all over the map. And I sort of reanalyzed this with the JDC archivists. The first memo that we have is in late 1937, October of 1937. That's in a board minutes. And the person on the board is saying, was shown an amazing collection of photographs by Roman Vishniac of our work. And so what I was talking to one of the archivists at the JDC, it almost seems like it was a spec thing. Like he went on his own and then brought this portfolio or whatever to someone at the JDC who then decided to hire him. So that's number one. Number two, when the JDC did hire him, he was sent to document their work. So that basically means like poverty. It doesn't necessarily mean religious. So yes, in the vanished world, and certainly in Polish Jews, which came before vanished world, it's very religious Jews. But in a vanished world, there are still some other photographs. And if you look at because I got to see all of the stuff, there are many photographs that are not they're for sure. He focused on these more observant communities, but there are other people in there, mixed in there. There are more modern people. There's just people, like there's people in the marketplace in Warsaw and in Krakow, and there's people that are like the porters in Warsaw, and they don't have peyot. They don't have peyot. They have like, so some of them do, some of them don't. Like, but I think it's just like a stare. But I think if you were to analyze every single photo, you would see, yes, it's mostly observant people, but there's plenty of photographs of other people, and there's people mixed in to that. So, you know, but I think I almost feel like, you know, there's so many choices that go on with photography. There's what you take a photograph of, which is that he had a much more diverse, you know, set of negatives than is shown. Then there's what people want to publish. What will someone else publish? And then what do you want to publish? You know, what is important to you? But what are people asking for? Maybe it's possible. Like I was thinking about this Polish Jews book, which came out in 1947, which is very observant. And there's like a Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote a introduction. It's a very it's a book about observant Polish Jews. I mean, maybe that was who funded. I mean, we don't really know the details. We don't know who funded, who paid for that, who wanted to publish it. Like there's all these steps that go into it. As a creator of material, I deal with this every day. Like, oh, this person wants to fund a film about this, but this is too left wing, or this is too right wing, or this is too this, or that. Who knows? You know, we don't know all the things that went into these things. So that's one of the things. The other thing is that, you know, I went into his archives where he writes about his experiences. And for sure, he started out with the poverty thing. he started out going for his mission of like, he's in Warsaw, he's photographing these children living in basement dwellings, he's photographing very poor Jews. He then creates this amazing thing, which we show in the film, that his daughter is like, we have a scene where he's putting this, she's gluing the photos in this book. He created this little like promotional book, which the JDC calls the maquette, which is like contrasts kids living in poverty on the streets in Warsaw to this like summer camp that they would go to, that the JDC paid for, which shows the kids having fun and playing and being out in nature. By the way, you can't really tell from these photographs of kids that they're religious, most of them. Some of them have kippot, but some of them don't. So you, there's that. But then I definitely got the sense, and reading his writings, that as he went sort of deeper and deeper into Eastern Europe, and when he gets to this place called Mukachevo, which is a very significant city for Judaism, because there was like the birth of the Hasidic movement there, and there was a normal, traditional, observant community there. And I'm sure there was also a secularist community there.
Yep.
Yeah, and they were kind of at odds with each other. And but he gets to Munkach, and he kind of becomes enthralled with these Hasidic Jews. And he also meets this man on the train who's a cantor, who's like a singer in the choir. And so he becomes sort of, he gets into one of these yeshivot. And there's like tons of photographs, and you feel like he drops the formalism that he has in his earlier, and actually we actually even don't even know like the order of this, but I kind of believe that he first went to Warsaw, because he says, I started in Warsaw in one of his writings. So he had very formalist compositions. You know, the camera's further back. It's like, it's a frame with a worker or somebody and like the carts of the city. But then when he gets to this Munkach place, he's like in and among the people, and you almost feel like he becomes one with them. And he really was fascinated by this whole yeshiva experience. So I almost feel like he's sort of falling in love with his own people, like little by little, as he's like going into this, you know, and fascinated by the spiritualism and by the mysticism and all of those kinds of things. So, you know, we don't have a lot of, and we know that he made up stuff, right? So we don't know what's factual and what's not. But you can kind of get a sense by reading through his stuff and seeing all of his negatives, like what the journey entailed in a general sense. I mean, I had to create a character. I had to do this. So I was like trying to get into his mind. Like, what is he thinking when he's taking these photos? Right. And you can kind of analyze.
So I want to ask you about the
lens
fibbing.
change, you know, these kinds of things.
I want to ask you about the fibbing, about you know, I mean, is that something where it couldn't be ignored? I mean, particularly, let's say what his daughter became your friend, and this whole conversation you told us about.
Even if she wasn't my friend,
no, but I'm saying it became something so central, not central, but it was part of his personality, I suppose, part of his work. So it's kind of interesting, like how because I think he did a great job in terms of, you see the genius of the guy as a photographer, okay, but you also see what a bullshit artist he is about certain things, you know, about making, I mean, about, you know, about how many languages does he actually speak, and how many doctors does he have? Does he have a doctorate? Or what is exactly his formal education? He's a philosopher, and he's a scientist, and he's a photographer, and this kind of stuff, and which could all be true, but evidently not all of it was true. So it's kind of interesting. How do you find that healthy balance? How do you find that balance as a filmmaker?
You're trying to, okay, so you're trying to create a portrait of somebody that's real, you know, and it's fascinating. Like, why did he feel like he had to say all these things? On the other hand, we don't really know. I mean, for sure, there's an element of like grandiosity and exaggeration, for sure, for sure. But like, there's kernels of truth, you know, like maybe he spoke a few words in all those languages. For sure, he spoke Russian, he spoke German, he spoke English, he probably spoke a little bit of Yiddish. Who knows? Maybe he learned some Polish on the trip, you know, we don't know. So the other thing that was crazy was then I was like, he said he had all these degrees, and we don't think he actually got any degrees at all. So then I'm like in the Magnus, which is where all his archives are, and I'm looking through his papers, and there it is. He has like honorary degrees. He has honorary PhDs from universities, from real American universities that bestowed on him an honorary degree. So maybe that's what he's talking about. You know, like for sure he made things up, for sure. But there is an element of like, we don't really know. And one of my favorite things that Mara told me, which we could not really find an appropriate place for in the film, but which I decided that in every Q&A I'm going to say, because she told it to me, is it turns out that some of my father's stories were true. So it just leaves you to you know, and the other thing is like, she used to explain to me like this was sort of like a Russian kind of personality from that time. There was grandiosity, there was storytelling, there was mystery, there was all these things that was part and parcel of like where he came from. So we don't know.
Right. Also, so interesting, you kind of like flashed it at us. He has a lover, and she's not Jewish, and she's blonde, and she's sexy, and she's beautiful, and she's beautiful, and she's
And there's
sexy, and
nude photos, and I only
and exactly,
put nude
and right, there are
photos,
photos
but
that are
there's
so
like 100, you know, there's probably like
like
100
crazy
gorgeous,
stuff there.
amazing noir, like
Yeah,
sensual
exactly. You're seeing stuff like,
photos
I don't
that
know,
he
from the
did.
20s or
Yeah.
30s where it's like, wow. Yeah, anyway. So what is your assessment of him overall? Of Vishniac?
I mean, he was a fascinating person. I mean, you can see that if you were related to him, it would be very challenging. I think he loved it that he wanted to be sort of, you know, sainted, you know, he wanted to be like the hero. My least favorite of his fibs was that he knew the Holocaust was coming, and that this was a mission from God to go. That was one thing that I've seen him write or say, which was really distressing, because nobody knew the Holocaust was coming. However, these people were in grave danger. As you mentioned, there was economic boycotts. He talks about all the time. They were in terrible conditions. He's going there almost as for the JDC, but almost as an activist to show what's going on. And then in addition to this, he says, I read Mein Kampf. I believed it. Hitler came to power. You know, it's all written there, you know, so he didn't know, but for sure, a lot of those people were not going to survive, even from just poverty or starvation or from whatever terrible disaster. And there was a lot of stuff going on even before the Nazis took over. Like there was borders changing and fighting in between the countries, and I can't even keep it straight. I mean, I have a history degree. I cannot even keep it straight. The places that he was in Carpathia were Czechoslovakia, and then they were Hungary, and then they were Czechoslovakia again, and then the
Romania,
Nazis.
right, yeah.
Like it's you know, now it's Ukraine. It's like,
absolutely. So I wanted this last question. We're going to open up to take a look at what people sent in as questions, but let's talk for a second about the person you knew, that Mara. Because I think that she has so much poise and sensitivity and intelligence, and seems to be like a very, you know, very nice person. At least, you know, it appears in the film, and you know, and she had this big shadow over her dad,
for sure,
this huge
shadow
personality. You know,
my
what's that?
cat just jumped on the table. I
Oh,
couldn't stand it any longer. I had to get her off. Sorry. Mara was
so
amazing. She was
yeah, I mean,
amazing.
she strikes as really an incredible person, and with everything she had to go through with such a complicated dad or complicated parental, family life, she took it upon herself to take this huge collection of everything he had there, which is, I mean, you also kind of intimated that he also made films, or you didn't intimate, you said he made films as well, and you showed some of the films. I mean, he had so much stuff
He
there, and
didn't
she had
make,
to
yeah, he
take care of
had,
the stuff.
right, right, right. Yeah.
I'm saying he had so much stuff, just and she organized it and made sure that it found a safe, a good, safe home. The public could appreciate it. And I mean, she took it upon herself despite all the complexities of the relationship. Yeah, I mean,
It was really interesting. She was reticent to tell. So she had obviously been interviewed like a million times about her dad. So when I first did the first interview, which is in the film, we call it the red interview because she's wearing red. She was very engaging, but she gave sort of like the story the way she usually tells it. And very soon, and then she agreed at a certain point to, it took a while for her to agree. And then when she did agree, we started filming her again. And I realized, I need to lose the crew. I need to lose the crew. I have a sound man, I have a cameraman, there's like someone's coming to do her makeup. She loves it. But I realized that like this was going to have to be like a very intimate conversation. And so I lived like 10 minutes away. So I used to like drop off the kids at school and go to her house with a voice recorder. And I started just sitting on her sofa, and we would go back through a lot of the things she already told me. I would go back again. Well, let's talk about this, at some subject that she already mentioned. And we would talk about it for an hour. We would get deep into that thing. And slowly, like we probably, she passed away at the end of 2018. So I got to spend like about 2.5 to 3 years with her working on this. She We became really close friends is what happened. I was going through all kinds of things. I would, and she was such an amazing person. I would share with her what was going on. She would be kind of a confidant. She would tell me, she would give me advice. And then she would share with me. And I almost felt like there was a therapy element where she was going back through all these memories that were very painful for her and telling me about them, in today's timeline of like, well, in those days, we didn't talk about this and we didn't talk about that. And parents had to behave like this towards their kids. Like it was very, it became like a very intimate space. And she definitely had things that she did not want to say. So there were these moments where I would turn off and oh, by the way, which is another fascinating thing, which I at one point wanted to put in the film, but didn't, because it just is like so weird. So at the end of her life, she was blind. She had macular degeneration. And she was such a visual person because she had been handed this visual life on a platter by her father. And so it was amazing to me, she like was able to sort of pretend like she wasn't blind, but she really was. So I would turn this voice recorder off and she would know that it was off. And then all of a sudden she would say something completely dramatic that would have been an amazing line for the film. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you had to wait until I wasn't recording on purpose, But after all these years went by, towards the very end, the last interview we did, which we did do on camera, she said, "You know what? What the hell? All these people are dead anyway. Why am I not telling you?" So she just said the stuff. So there was an element, and then I think, I was happy that I was very sad that she didn't get to see the finished film, but her daughter came to the premiere with her daughters and granddaughters. So there was like 3 other generations of Mara's descendants who came. And the daughter, Naomi Schiff, said, this is the story that my mother wanted to tell, and she never got to tell it. She was overshadowed by very big men her whole life, and she never got to tell this story. And this is what the way she wanted to tell it, and you did it. And I felt like an immense satisfaction, because always, you know, for me, the way that I work, and I know not every documentarian or journalist or anything, but like sometimes you're trying to get a scoop or something. I always feel like my the way that I work, I'm trying, I owe something to the truth of the person that I'm trying to transmit their story. So if I got her truth, I'm very sad. That makes me very content. So.
Kol hakavod, kol hakavod. I'm gonna take shoot questions to you from the audience. Okay, that was great. Thank you. So the film touches on themes of displacement, persecution, and resilience. What specific aspects of Vishniac's story do you believe resonate most deeply with audiences today? That was an easy question. Should I repeat? I'll read. I'll give it to you again. The film touches on themes of displacement, persecution, and resilience. What specific aspects of Vishniac's story do you believe resonate most deeply with audiences today?
So this film took a very long time to make. And when I started making the film, it was like 2016. And actually I did the first interview with Mara in 2014. But we still didn't start in earnest till 2016, 2017. And then we finished the film and released it just now. So a lot of things have happened in the world and in my world since I started the film. So there were things that we would be doing while we were editing, things would happen, you know, there would be, we would talk about Mara's experiences as an immigrant in America. This is an American immigrant story. We would talk about things that were happening on the, you know, in politics in America, and incitement kinds of things that was going on, things, you know, in her story. And then just recently we have October 7th, and it's made me reevaluate completely and, you know, we had some rising anti-Semitism going on in America and around the world that I felt that when I heard Mara's story is like an extreme of that. But now, from where I sit in Tel Aviv, after experiences that I've gone through, and we're after October 7th, I feel like, wow, we just saw some of these things all over again. And Mara's story in some ways is even, what is the word? Tame, you know? So, yes, I mean, I actually had this very bizarre experience personally where the film was coming out in theaters in January. And so in December, I hadn't watched it for several months, maybe even half a year as a film. And I sat down and I had to watch the file to check it for like glitches before it was sent off to the theater. And suddenly I'm watching Kristallnacht scene. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm seeing this on the news. And it's happening here, and it's happening now, and it's scary. And, you know, she says something like 100 Jews were killed on, Carrie, our scholar, says 100 Jews were killed on Kristallnacht. And I was like, not so bad. I mean, after October 7th, it didn't seem like that many, you know? So it's a cynical reaction, but I was shocked at how it changed the meaning of the film for me. And also the incitement, and also Goebbels speaking there. There were scenes that I feel like I've like now lived myself, sitting from where I sit. So Yeah.
Okay. Somebody asked a question, was a bit confused about how they managed to get everybody to America, how the daughter and the mother were retrieved from Sweden, how the son was retrieved from Riga, and how they managed to, can you kind of like summarize like how kind of technically how did this work? How did they all manage to get to America from like, from 3 or 4 different locations? Just like in broad strokes, like so if you understand how that played out.
So, Luta, Mara's mother, was this amazing force of nature, very organized, very resourceful, very smart. And she just pounded the pavement and worked very hard to get them visas. And Roman was in France with his parents. And at this point, by the time they got the visas, Luta and Wolf and Mara were all together in Sweden. And they realized they had to travel back through Berlin. They stopped at their apartment, which was a very weird experience for Mara, to sort of separate from her world and lose her whole childhood world. And then they went and they met up with Roman in Lisbon, and they got on a boat to America, and they arrived on December 31st, 1940. And she tells a great story that like they went to Times Square for New Year's Eve, the night that they got there. Yeah. But
Okay,
Roman
that was
also was
great.
in an internment camp in
Right.
and they were stuck. I mean, there was all kinds of really complicated things. Wolf was stuck in Riga, and couldn't get out. And it was like a miracle that he got out when he did, because the Soviet Union took over Riga, just like they marched in just like a few weeks later, and he wouldn't have been able to leave. Roman was in this internment camp. But
Amazing.
Luta, it was Luta. And then Luta became, when she came to America, she became a travel agent. So
Yeah, that was a question. So he asked
what
happened
happened
with
to
Luda? What
Luta?
happened
That's
with
what
Luda? Yeah.
that's what happened to
That's what
Luta.
okay. The question here is, did Mara tell you the story about Walter Bearer smuggling more than 3,000 negatives to the United States? I don't know what
Yes.
we're referencing here. Yes. Okay.
Yes. Walter, yes. I have a letter that Walter wrote to Mara about his experiences, and it's a very crazy story because Roman gave his negatives to this friend, Walter Beer, who he thought was like a trustworthy, responsible person. I don't understand why he gave them to him instead of taking him himself. But then Walter Beer had a crazy story of escaping Europe and ended up in like Casablanca and then going to Cuba, and has like this whole circuitous route. And eventually Roman has to go to US, they got like confiscated by customs, and Roman had to go get them out. So that was like a side story.
You share with us what are the projects you're currently working on or have in development, and how they align with the themes and passions that have guided your career as a filmmaker.
Um,
Again, can you share with us what are the projects you're
I
currently
can't,
working
no,
on?
I can't, I like, I'm working on a couple of things that I can't share.
Okay.
I have been doing a lot of filming in the South since October 7th, and I have been filming, interviewing people who've been through
Okay.
all of that kind of thing. And spending a lot of time in the South. And I did do a film about Sderot, about that. I spent 7 years making a film about Sderot and the experience of people living there. So that's something that that's the film that I did before this one. People who like lived for 20 years under, getting rocketed. And musicians, and it's a very complex story, and they're all Middle Eastern refugees. Anyway, so what else am I working on? I also did this film called Vishniac about the international human rights movement to free Soviet Jews from the Soviet Union, including Natan Sharansky. So it's about refuse Nixon dissidents and activists around the world. So those are some of my, and I did a film about a Holocaust survivor turned civil rights activist. Those are some of my other, I also did a film about Kosovo, post-war Kosovo. So little smattering of things.
Somebody asked if there were parts of the film, this film, that you did in color. And what made you decide to do those parts in color when most of the film was in black and white?
So it was important for me to separate Roman's photography from Mara's narrative and story, and also the real-time action of like our heroes and what is happening to them versus like the photography. So I wanted the photography to stand out and to be highlighted, I guess. And I also wanted people to be immersed in the film. And I felt that, that would be the best way to do that. So it was important to me to have those two different worlds, the worlds of like through the lens, and then the world of their experiences, their lived experiences.
Okay, thank you. Can you speak to the significance of Vishniac's photography in shaping our understanding of Jewish culture and history, both before and after World War II?
So there's yes. So first of all, in America, Vishniac's photography became kind of iconic as like the face of the Eastern European Jew somehow, From a Vanished World and Polish Jews, and all of his and these exhibitions. And so I think it had a great impact. I think that I know that like they were used in the production of Fiddler on the Roof for references. They were used in Schindler's List for visual references also, and sort of for inspiration. By Janusz Kaminski has been interviewed about this and said that those images helped him design the way he was going to shoot the movie. So yes, so that had a huge impact in America. It's very interesting because in Israel, people really don't know who Vishniac is, which is fascinating to me. And I'm sort of investigating that right now here. I do want to say something else interesting, which is which the photos that many less people who have seen, which is his sort of larger work, like photos of Jews in visa offices trying to get visas to escape Germany, the photos of Jews in the Hachsharot and in like these Jewish organizations in Germany, and other. There's also people who are on the Kinder transport, and people who are boarding ships to Palestine. There's people who are Jewish refugees that just arrived in America. There's a whole thing about American Jews in the 50s. So he has like, I want to say, and we used to talk about this in the editing room, that Roman Vishniac is like the Jewish Forrest Gump of the 20th century. He was in every place at every time that you could. He was in Moscow during the revolution. He goes to Berlin. He's in Berlin during Kristallnacht. He's at Besbanchen, which is before Kristallnacht, which is where the first deportation of German Jews goes to
17,000 German Jews of Polish extraction are kicked out.
Right? And he's there for the JDC photographing this. And that's actually a scene that got cut out of the film just for time purposes. But he went there. He was there. Rabbi Heschel was there also. And Ringelblum,
Manuel Ringelblum
there.
Yep.
And it's like a place where sort of, it's like a momentous thing. It was the first deportation. They were taken in the middle of the night with no clothes, with no baggage, with nothing. They just suddenly, Nazis came to their door and said, you're being deported, took them, threw them out of the country, but then they couldn't get into Poland either. So they're stranded at this train station on the border town, on the border of between Poland and Germany. And it was there's like a humanitarian crisis that ensued, and Vishniac goes to document this. People were committing suicide because they were freezing. They had no food and no clothes and nothing. So he's there. Then he's at Kristallnacht. He's in Berlin at Kristallnacht. He didn't, we don't have like the photos that we see in the film actually are not his photos. Those are like newspaper photos or whatever of Kristallnacht, of the burning synagogues and stuff. And then he's, all over Eastern Europe during the boycott, during everything that's happening. Then he's in all these places all at the right moments. He's setting sail on to America on the last, one of the last boats, so it's interesting. I love the set of photographs of the people trying to get visas to escape, because the desperation that he captures in their eyes and the hope and the sort of pleadingness that he's able to and it reminds me of some scenes in Casablanca where people go to beg for these exit permits, and it's amazing that he captured that. So
last question for you.
That was kind of like a long answer to the question, but
It's all good.
Cool.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It's
It's amazing. It's great. So somebody said that they loved the story of the woman whose grandfather was a smiling farmer. How did her recognition of that photograph come about? Like, how did she actually realize that's her grandfather?
So her cousin was in the Holocaust Museum and they knew it was him because there was like some family photos where he's like in a line, one of those portraits where there's like 10 people standing there and they're like this.
Okay.
And I think that photos might even be in the film. The coolest thing about the smiling farmer is, for me, is it's like the gift that keeps on giving, because I met Lisa she was in New Jersey, and then some of the smiling family, when the film came out in New York a couple months ago, I met some more relatives and hung out with them in New York City. And then when I came back to Tel Aviv, they told me about other relatives that were here that I didn't realize, because we had like a whole opening here last May, but I didn't even know these people existed. But they're like all the other smiling farmer grandchildren and great grandchildren. And so now they've befriended me and I'm like hanging out with them. And my son, we just went over for Shabbat dinner at the granddaughter of the smiling farmer's house. And my kid was playing with their kid. It was very, very cool. So, and they're incredibly, they're so grateful. They're so grateful about the film, but they're so grateful that they have this photograph, and it really goes to sort of the power of a single photograph, because in the photo that they have where he's in a lineup of like a family portrait, he looks like a totally different person. He's just standing there like this. But in these Vishniac photos of him, you really see who he was. And they're just amazed by it and how much they look like him. And they're like, this looks like me about him. And my kid looks like and it's kind of incredible. And it made us start talking about like, how can we find more people in the photograph so that they can appreciate these kinds of, find more relatives of people. So.
Right. Somebody wrote in the chat that AI now can be used dramatically with that stuff. And that's good.
I literally been looking into that this week about these photographs.
Amazing. Laura, thank you so much for being with us. Great film. And he says it's just out. So I guess hopefully a lot of people are going to see it and be
I was going to say,
impressed as we are.
We have upcoming screenings continually being added, and it's at vishniacfilm.com website. So if you see that there's a screening near you or a friend or family, please send them to go look at it. And we're trying to get it out as widely as possible. We're trying to show it in synagogues and in, museums and all universities and all kinds of places. So we're always looking.
You have a website? You have a website,
We have a
right?
website. Yeah, we have a website, which is vishniacfilm.com.
No, do you have a website?
Oh, do I have my own website?
Somebody wrote, do you have a website? Okay.
No, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and just at Laura Bialis. And then the Vishniac, it's like at Vishniac Film also for those other platforms also. So you can kind of follow along. I would say if you want screening information, the best place is the Vishniac Film website, but you can follow me on Instagram. I post cool stuff.
Very nice. Well, Laura, thank you so much for being with us. Ellen, back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura and Avi, for today's event. So many really wonderful comments that are coming in the chat. This film, Vishniac, serves as a poignant reminder of the power of storytelling to illuminate the past, provoke introspection, and inspire action in the present. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. We hope that all of you will join us next week, Wednesday, March 27th at 2 p.m. for the second in our new series, Lessons in Resilience from the Holocaust and Genocide with Tali Nates. Next week's session will feature Carl Wilkins, Rwanda's community approach to rebuilding trust, restorative strategies for healing relationships. We hope that we'll see you all again soon. Stay safe, stay healthy, and take care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.